Before I tell you what happened after I walked out of my own engagement party, and how one single decision I made 3 months later completely unraveled the perfect image my family had spent years building, drop a comment right now and tell me what time it is, where you are, and where you're watching from. And one more thing. Have you ever had the most important moment of your life hijacked by someone who just couldn't stand not being the center of attention? My name is Emma. I'm 28 years old. And the story I'm about to tell you is the story of the night I stopped being the family doormat and started being the person I always should have been. I need you to understand something first. I wasn't a dramatic person. I wasn't someone who made scenes or sent long emotional texts or called family meetings to air grievances. My whole life, I was the one who kept things calm. I was the one who smiled when things weren't okay. I was the one who said it's fine when it absolutely was not fine. If you'd asked anyone who knew me 2 years ago to describe me in one word, they probably would have said easygoing. What they actually meant, what I eventually understood they meant, was convenient. I'm the oldest of 3 girls. My sister Diane is 4 years younger than me, and my sister Kayla is 7 years younger. Growing up, I thought we were a normal family. We had a house in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. We had a mom who baked on Sundays, and a dad who coached Little League, even though none of us played baseball. We had holidays and birthday cakes, and family photos where everyone was smiling. From the outside, we looked like a Hallmark movie waiting to happen. But here's the thing about families that look perfect from the outside. Someone is always doing the work to make it look that way. And in my family, that someone was me. I don't want to make Diane sound like a monster, because the truth is more complicated than that. But I do need to be honest about what she was like growing up, because it's the only way any of the rest of this makes sense. Diane was my mother's favorite. I knew it by the time I was 10 years old. Not because my mother ever said it out loud, she never would have, but because of the 1,000 small ways it showed up every single day. Diane's art projects went on the refrigerator. Mine went in a drawer. When Diane got a B on a test, my mother told her she was brilliant and just needed to apply herself. When I got a B on a test, my mother asked what happened. When Diane wanted something, a new phone, a later curfew, money for something with her friends, the answer was almost always yes. When I wanted something, there was always a condition attached, always a reason to wait, always a we'll see that never turned into anything. My dad wasn't oblivious to it. I could tell sometimes, the way his jaw tightened when my mother made a fuss over Diane for something ordinary. But he never said anything. He was a peacekeeper the same way I was. He thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping the family together. It took me a long time to understand those are not the same thing at all. Kayla, the youngest, kind of existed in her own orbit. She was quiet and bookish, and she spent most of her childhood in her room reading, which I now understand was its own kind of survival strategy. The two of us were close in the way that people are close when they've survived the same thing. We didn't talk about it directly for years. We just understood each other. I left for college at 18, and I felt, for the first time in my life, like I could breathe. I went to Ohio State, got a degree in marketing, moved to Chicago after graduation, built a life that was entirely mine. I made friends who liked me for exactly who I was. I got good at my job. I started to understand that the version of myself I'd been performing my whole life, the calm one, the easy one, the one who never needed anything, was a mask I'd put on so young. I'd almost forgotten it wasn't my face. And then I met Daniel. Daniel came into my life at 24, through a mutual friend at a work event. He was funny and patient, and he had this way of looking at me like I was saying something worth listening to, even when I thought I was just rambling. We dated for 1.5 years before he asked me to move in with him. We lived together for 2 years before he proposed. It was a Thursday evening in April, in our apartment, with no audience and no big production, just the two of us, and a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and a question I'd been hoping he would ask. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We were happy. I want you to understand that. Whatever came after, that was real. We decided to have the engagement party in Columbus, so both families could be there. Daniel's family is from Cincinnati, close enough to make a weekend of it. My mother immediately volunteered to host it at her house, and I made the mistake of saying yes, because I genuinely thought that planning this party together would be a good thing. A bonding thing. A fresh start thing. I should have known better. I had 28 years of evidence. The planning process was fine at first. My mother was enthusiastic in a way that felt genuine. She called me with ideas about decorations and food. She and I went to a bakery together and picked out a dessert table. Daniel's mom drove up from Cincinnati, and the three of us had lunch, and it was lovely, and I let myself feel hopeful. I let myself believe that this moment, my engagement, my party, my happiness, was something my mother would let be mine. 2 days before the party, Diane called me. She didn't call to say congratulations. She'd already done that, technically, when Daniel and I had first announced a quick text with a champagne emoji that I'd told myself counted. She called because she had something she wanted to tell me, and she wanted to tell me before the party. I assumed it was something about what she was planning to wear, or some drama with her boyfriend Marcus that I was going to be expected to weigh in on. I sat down on my couch with a glass of water and I said, "What's up?" She told me she was pregnant. I want to be very clear. I was happy for her, genuinely. Diane and Marcus had been together for 3 years, and they'd talked about having kids, and this was good news. I told her that. I told her I was so happy for her. I asked how far along she was. I asked how Marcus had reacted. I asked if she'd told Mom yet. And then she said the thing that I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "Mom wants to announce it at your party. She thinks it would be a good way to share it with everyone at once since the whole family will already be there." I remember the silence that followed that sentence. I remember looking at the wall of my apartment and feeling something shift inside me. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter than that. A door closing. I said, "That's my engagement party, Diane." She said, "I know, but it would just be one announcement, and everyone would be so happy." I said, "It's my engagement party." She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "Mom already planned what she's going to say." She was really excited about it. I told Diane I'd call her back. I didn't call her back. I called my mother. My mother answered on the second ring, and before I could even say anything, she launched into how wonderful it was going to be, how she'd planned to do it right after the toast, how Diane was so nervous, and this would make it so special, how everyone was going to be so thrilled, how it was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. That phrase, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. I said, very quietly, "Mom, I don't want you to do that at my party." There was a pause. And then my mother said, in the voice she reserved for when she thought I was being unreasonable, "Emma, your sister is pregnant. This is a big deal." I said, "My engagement is also a big deal." She said, "No one is trying to take anything away from you. It'll be 1 minute." I said, "Mom, please, I am asking you not to do this." She said, "I really think you're being a little oversensitive about this." And there it was. Oversensitive. The word that had followed me my entire life like a shadow. The word that meant, your feelings are too big, your needs are too much. Please make yourself smaller, so this is easier for everyone else. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I said, "Okay." And I hung up, and I sat very still in my apartment for a long time. I called Daniel. I told him what had happened. He said, "Do you want to cancel the party?" And I said I didn't know yet. I said I needed to think. I thought about it for 2 days. I went back and forth. I told myself maybe it wouldn't be so bad. I told myself it was one moment, and the rest of the night would still be ours. I told myself I was being, and I hated myself for even thinking it oversensitive. And then the night of the party came, and I put on the dress I'd bought for the occasion, a dusty rose midi dress that Daniel said made me look like I was glowing, and we drove to my parents' house, and I walked in, and I smiled at people, and I hugged Daniel's parents, and I accepted glasses of champagne, and I watched my mother move through the room with this electric energy that I recognized the energy she always had when she was about to do something she knew I didn't want her to do. The toast happened about an hour in. My father stood up and said some genuinely sweet things about me and about Daniel, and Daniel's father said some things, and there was a moment that was beautiful and real and mine. I felt it. I felt the rightness of it. And then my mother stood up. She said how happy she was to have everyone together. She said how much she loved me. She said she had one more piece of news to share because, as she put it, when it rains, it pours with blessings in this family. And she announced that Diane was pregnant. The room erupted. Everyone turned toward Diane, who was standing near the back looking simultaneously thrilled and sheepish. Marcus put his arm around her. People swarmed them with hugs. Someone started crying happy tears. Someone else asked how far along. The dessert table, the toasts, Daniel's grandmother's ring, the two of us, all of it, was suddenly backdrop. I stood there with my champagne glass and I watched it happen. Daniel found my hand in the crowd. He didn't say anything. He just held my hand. He knew. I put my champagne glass down on the nearest table. I picked up my purse. I found Kayla near the kitchen doorway, and I looked at her, and she looked at me, and she said, in a voice, just for me, M. Just my name. That was all she needed to say. I went to Daniel, and I said quietly, I'm going to head out. He said, I'll come with you. I said, you should stay. It's your party too. I need some air. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, I'll be right behind you. He kissed my forehead. I said goodbye to his parents. I did not say goodbye to my mother. I walked out the front door of the house I grew up in, got in my car, and drove back to Chicago. Not a hotel. Not Kayla's apartment. Home. My home. The one I'd built. I want to talk about what happens in your body when you finally stop doing the thing you've been doing your whole life. When you stop absorbing. When you stop softening. When you stop saying it's fine, when it is not fine. There's this moment of almost terrifying quiet. Like pressure equalizing. Like something that's been underwater for years, finally breaking the surface. That's what the drive back to Chicago felt like. My phone was going off the whole drive. I didn't look at it until I got home. There were texts from my mother, first confused, then a little annoyed, then a softened version of an apology that wasn't really an apology, something about how she hadn't realized I'd left, and she hoped I was okay. There were texts from Diane saying she hadn't known it would bother me this much. There was a long text from Daniel that just said he loved me and he'd be there in a few hours. There was a text from Kayla that said, simply, I'm proud of you. I didn't respond to any of them that night except Daniel's. Over the next few weeks, my mother called several times. The conversations followed a familiar pattern. She would acknowledge that maybe the timing hadn't been ideal. She would pivot to how much Diane had been going through with the pregnancy. She would bring up how much work she'd put into the party. And eventually she would circle back to the word I'd heard my whole life, oversensitive. Once she said, I just don't understand why everything has to be so complicated with you. I held the phone and looked out my window at the Chicago skyline, and I thought, I don't think it's complicated with me. I think it's complicated with you. I stopped defending myself. I stopped explaining. I just let her talk, and when she was done I would say something neutral, and end the call. I was not cruel. I was not cold. I was just no longer available for the performance. Daniel and I kept planning the wedding. We'd always talked about something small. Neither of us was interested in a big production. 50 people, max. A restaurant in Chicago with a private room. Dinner and dancing. His best friend as the officiant. My best friend Jamie as my maid of honor. When the venue confirmed our date, I made a decision. I told Daniel first. I said, I don't think I want my family at the wedding. He was quiet for a moment. He said, tell me more. I said, I don't want the day to be about managing them. I don't want to spend my wedding day wondering what my mother is going to do. I don't want Diane's pregnancy to be a recurring topic at every moment. I just want one day that is completely, genuinely ours. He said, then let's have that. We didn't send save the dates to my family. We sent them to 47 people. His family, my friends, a few colleagues, Kayla. I called Kayla separately and told her everything. She cried a little. She said, are you sure? I said yes. She said, okay, I'm going to be there. She flew to Chicago on a Friday night. and helped me get ready on Saturday morning, and stood next to me when I married Daniel on a Saturday afternoon in October, in a restaurant with warm lighting and flowers I'd chosen, and music we both loved, surrounded entirely by people who had never once made me feel like my happiness was an inconvenience. I have a photo from that night that I keep on my desk. Kayla and Jamie on either side of me, all three of us laughing at something Daniel said right before the shutter clicked. I look at that photo and I feel something I didn't know I was missing for most of my life. I look like myself. We didn't post on social media that night. We were present. We danced until the restaurant closed. We didn't look at our phones. It was the most peaceful day of my life. 3 weeks later, a photo surfaced. One of Daniel's cousins had posted a group shot on Instagram, tagging Daniel, and my mother's friend from Columbus, who followed Daniel on Instagram for reasons I still don't fully understand, saw it and sent it to my mother. My mother called me 11 times in 1 hour. I let it go to voicemail the first 10 times. On the 11th, I picked up. She was not composed. She said, "You got married." Not a question. A statement of shock. I said, "Yes." She said, "Without us." I said, "Yes." She said, "Emma, how could you do this to your family?" And I thought about that question. How could I do this to my family? Not, "I understand why you felt hurt." Not, "I can see what led to this." Not even, "I'm sorry for my part." Just how could I do this to my family? As if the only thing that mattered was how my choices reflected on them. I said, "Mom, I spent my entire life making things easier for everyone else. I needed one day that was just mine." She said, "And you couldn't give us that one day?" I said, "You couldn't give me my engagement party." The silence that followed was the longest silence I have ever sat inside. She hung up. Diane called the next day. Her approach was different from my mother's, less confrontational, more wounded. She said she couldn't believe I hadn't invited her to my own wedding. She said she was my sister. She said she had always been there for me. I listened to this, and I thought about all the specific ways in which Diane had not, in fact, been there for me. And I thought about the engagement party, and I thought about the text with the champagne emoji, and I thought about the call 2 days before the party, when she'd told me about the announcement plan with the energy of someone sharing exciting news rather than someone asking for permission. I said, "Diane, I love you, and I hope your pregnancy is healthy and wonderful. But I needed that day to be what I needed it to be." She cried. I felt sad for her, genuinely, but I did not take it back. My father called 2 days after my mother. His call was different from everyone else's. He was quiet on the phone, and when he spoke, he didn't accuse me of anything. He just said, "I'm sorry I wasn't there." Something in his voice made me want to cry. He said, "I want you to know I understand why." I said, "Dad." He said, "I know I should have done more. When you were growing up, I saw things and I kept my mouth shut because I thought it was easier. I thought I was keeping the peace." He paused. I wasn't keeping anything. I was just not being brave. I didn't know what to say. He said, "Your grandmother did it to your mother, you know, the favoritism. Your mother was the one who was always expected to be fine with everything. And she never dealt with it. And I think she repeated it without knowing she was repeating it." I sat with that for a long time. The image of my mother at 18, absorbing the same things I had absorbed, wearing the same mask I had worn, being told the same word oversensitive, maybe not out loud, but in every small action that added up to the same message. I said, "That doesn't make it okay." He said, "No, it doesn't. I'm not saying it does." I said, "Why didn't you tell me this before?" He said, "Because I'm not brave." A pause. "I'm trying to be better at that." We talked for an hour. It was the most honest conversation I had ever had with my father. At the end of it, he asked if Daniel and I would consider having a small celebration dinner sometime, something low-key, something that was on our terms. He said, "I'd really like to be in your life, Emma, if you'll let me." I said I'd think about it. I meant it. My mother and I didn't speak for 2 months after the wedding. It wasn't a dramatic cutoff, no announcement, no letter, no final confrontation. I just stopped picking up the phone, and she eventually stopped calling as frequently, and we existed in the strange, suspended silence of two people who aren't ready to have the conversation yet. She reached out right around Thanksgiving. A text, not a call. She said she'd been thinking about a lot of things. She said she knew she hadn't always made me feel seen. She said she didn't fully understand her own patterns yet, but she was trying to. She said she'd started seeing a therapist, which surprised me. She said she wasn't asking me to forget anything. She just wanted to know if there was a possibility of things being different. I read that text 4 times. I thought about my father's voice on the phone. I thought about the way patterns move through families like water through cracks, not because anyone wants them to, but because no one stops them. I thought about the fact that my mother had her own version of this story, her own childhood wound, her own moment of walking out or not walking out or wishing she had. I thought about what I wanted. Not what was expected of me. What I wanted. I texted her back. I said I was open to talking when I felt ready. I said I wasn't ready yet, but I wasn't saying, never. I said I needed her to understand that the relationship we'd had before wasn't one I was willing to go back to, and that if we were going to have something real, it would have to be built on honesty, not performance. I said I loved her. I said that had never been the question. She replied with one line. I hear you. Take the time you need. I don't know what happens next. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think there's a version of this story where everything resolves neatly, where my mother has a full transformation, where Diane apologizes in a way that lands, where we all gather around a table someday, and the warmth is genuine, and everything that happened is the dark tunnel that led somewhere bright. Maybe that version is possible. I'm not closing the door on it. But what I know for certain is this. I got married on my terms. I had one day that was completely, entirely, unambiguously mine. I looked like myself in the photographs. I danced until a restaurant closed, and I did not spend a single second of that night managing anyone else's feelings. And I know that the version of me who would have swallowed the engagement party, smiled through it, said it was fine, and called herself oversensitive for feeling anything that version of me would not have had that day. The people who needed me to be convenient were not the people I needed to build a life around. The moment I understood that really understood it, in my body and not just in my head, was the moment everything changed. I built my life around Daniel, and Kayla, and Jamie, and the 47 people who sat in that restaurant and watched me choose myself. It turns out that's more than enough. If this story made you feel something, if you've ever been called oversensitive for having a need, or had a moment that was supposed to be yours turned into someone else's stage, or spent years being the convenient one, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. Tell me what time it is where you are. Tell me if you've ever walked out of a room that was supposed to celebrate you, and how it felt on the other side. And one more question before you go. If you were in my position, would you have invited them to the wedding? Would you have given them one more chance to show up differently? Or would you have done exactly what I did? I'll see you in the next one. I used to believe that keeping quiet was the same as keeping the peace. That absorbing pain gracefully was a sign of maturity. That being the person who never needed anything was something to be proud of. Emma believed that too, for a long time. She was the oldest. She was the responsible one. She was the one who held things together while everyone else took up space. And for years, that invisible labor was rewarded with nothing except the expectation that she would keep doing it. But here's what I've come to understand, watching her story unfold, and sitting with my own version of it. The way we treat people is rarely random. It follows a logic, not always a conscious one, but a logic nonetheless. When someone is repeatedly shown that their needs are secondary, they begin to organize their life around that belief. They shrink. They pre-apologize for wanting things. They call themselves oversensitive before anyone else has the chance to. Emma did all of that. I've done versions of it too. And then there's a moment, not always a dramatic one, but always a real one, where something shifts. Where the cost of staying small finally outweighs the cost of standing up. For Emma, it was watching her own engagement party dissolve into someone else's announcement. It wasn't the loudest moment of her life, but it was the clearest. She finally saw, with absolute precision, what had always been true. The people around her had never learned to make room for her because she had always made room for them first. What she did next was not revenge. I want to be clear about that. She didn't scheme. She didn't make a scene. She simply stopped participating in arrangements that cost her everything and gave her nothing. She got married on her own terms. She surrounded herself with people who showed up for her the way she had always shown up for everyone else. That's not cruelty. That's self-respect with a spine. The hard truth is that the people who hurt Emma most weren't evil. Her mother was running a pattern she'd inherited without questioning it. Her sister had been shaped by years of being centered and had never developed the muscle of considering others. Her father had confused silence with safety for decades. These are human failures, not villains. But understanding where damage comes from does not mean you are required to keep absorbing it. What I believe and what Emma's story confirms for me is that intelligence without honesty is just cleverness, and strength without boundaries is just endurance. Real growth asks us to be honest about what is actually happening, even when the truth is uncomfortable. It asks us to be strong enough to act on that honesty, even when acting means disappointing people we love. And it asks us to do all of that with dignity, without cruelty, without performance, without making our healing into someone else's punishment. Emma didn't get a perfect ending. She got something better. She got a real one.